Today we will be comparing two different soldering wires. One being the leaded one by Keister, and then we have another one right here by Mechanic, which is lead free. I'm not sure of what uh, this Mechanic is composed of, but I know it's a proprietary blend made by them, and it's a Chinese company. Uh, and we have the infamous Kester or Keister, however you say it. This one is made of 60% tin and 40% lead, and we'll compare it. As you all know, leaded solder is, in my opinion, quite better than unleaded. It flows much better, and you get those little shiny solders when you're done with these leaded ones. However, nowadays, with all the green initiative and Europe banning leaded solders, we have seen a lot of influx of these lead-free solder or unleaded. Um, these are also okay, I would say. Some people say they mess up your soldering iron tips. I have used them a bit, but they're okay. I wouldn't say it's like leaded right here, but it's close enough. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and compare these under the microscope, and let's try to solder some random parts. We have a board from an old hard drive that we can just test on and just solder a couple of components and see how that flows. We will make sure to test it with a wick also, see how it works with wicks and what temperature each melts under. I know that the leaded ones melt pretty easy, and it's pretty easy overall to solder. I will be using the same form of flux for both. I'll be using the Amtech flux, and let's go ahead and try it. All right, so we have the board under the microscope, and this is just an old board I have right here, and I've already removed the microcontroller that was in place. Now I'll be using the left one as my leaded, and the right one I'll be using lead free. As usual, you have to put as much flux as you can to have a smooth soldering experience. So let's go ahead and apply some flux. And the first one I'll be attempting to solder on is the leaded solder. It's pretty simple to solder with. Okay, so let's go ahead. As you can see, it flows so smooth. You don't have to do almost nothing. Bare minimum. You put a bit of flux, melt the solder, and just move your soldering iron back and forth, and it's as easy as that. Let's try the unleaded one, or the lead-free one by Mechanic, on the right side, and we will compare them and see which one is a better soldering wire. Yeah, which one is a better soldering wire in general. So let's go ahead and solder this side, and as you can see, if you're noticing, it kind of takes a bit more work to melt the solder on the unleaded one, and it needs more temperature. So the leaded one melts right under 180 degrees, and the unleaded one, depending on which one you get, it's in about the same range. But I've noticed most of the times it requires a lot of flux to solder properly and easily, and it requires a bit more heat on your soldering iron basically. And if you notice, both joints are soldered now. I had a little bit of a blob over there that I fixed. All you need is a bit of flux to fix any joints that have too much solder basically. So Now let's clean it up, and I'll zoom it in so you guys can see and notice what the leaded looks like versus the unleaded one. The first thing I normally notice is that leaded solder is super shiny compared to unleaded. Um, and I have even noticed that some companies actually add 2% silver onto their leaded solder. And I think that's probably the best type of solder you can get. And it's pretty shiny, and the silver actually gives it a bit of extra strength and reliability in the long term. But as far as normal soldering work, I would go for the leaded one. It's always consistent, and it has great joints. It holds perfectly. Never had an issue with it. If you can see, I'm actually turning the lights on and putting the brightness on, but you can already immediately notice that the leaded one is much shinier than the unleaded one. So that's the leaded one on top, extremely shiny, and the leaded one, it's kind of dim. I mean, it gets the job done in all honesty, but if you have the choice to get the leaded one, I would much more recommend you guys to get the leaded one. And uh, start your soldering journey, man. It's not that complicated. It's not that hard to learn how to solder. All you need is a couple of tools. You can start off with a cheap microscope and a cheap soldering iron, and um, you started off as a hobby, and all of a sudden you're getting better at it and upgrading your tools, and without a doubt, you will be incredibly good at soldering in a few months or years, depending on your pace. Okay, so we also the example on the board, and as you can all tell, I prefer the keister much more than the mechanic. Um, we all know that lead is poisonous, so that's the reason that leaded solder is not preferred nowadays by big companies like Samsung or whatever. Most of their boards are made or soldered with unleaded solder nowadays, and making it even harder to remove because most of these unleaded solders have a pretty high melting point. Uh, so that makes it a bit hard for us technicians to remove old components. Other than that, the keister is incredible. I would grab these, and if you're a beginner especially, I would start learning from this, and then eventually you can start using any solder wire. And thank you guys for tuning in. If you like, anything that has electronics or anything that deals with soldering, make sure you go ahead and tap that subscribe button. And if you like this video, go ahead and like this video. I appreciate it. You guys have a good day.